Well, a warm welcome to everyone joining our webinar this morning. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm located, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to our First Nations arts colleagues participating in this webinar today. I'm Kate Jenkins, the Chair of Creative Workplaces, and I'm delighted to be hosting and presenting this webinar. And I'm joined today by Rosie Lourde, the Chair of Screen Australia's Gender Matters Task Force. Rosie, can I get you to jump on and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kate. And hi, everyone. I'm Rosie Lourde. As Kate just said, I'm the chair of Screen Australia's Gender Matters Task Force, but I'm also an independent maker. And just to explain that super quickly before we get into things, Gender Matters is the umbrella term that Screen Australia uses to address all of its efforts across the underrepresentation of women and gender diverse practitioners across the screen industry, including digital games. But the task force itself is made up of independent practitioners across the industry and the sector, built to advise Screen Australia on how best to create some opportunities for women and gender diverse practitioners. So while I'm the chair and it sounds fancy, I'm actually just an independent filmmaker and not an official spokesperson for Screen Australia. But obviously, what we're going to be talking about today with Kate is central to all of the work that we do across the task force.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rosie. And Rosie will be back soon. We're also being joined by our Auslan interpreters. Thank you, Alana and Claire. So, as most of you would know, Creative Workplaces has been established as a new function within Creative Australia to promote fair, safe, and respectful workplaces in the arts, culture, screen, and digital games sector. Creative Workplaces aims to improve workplace standards sector wide. Our work will support artists, arts workers, and arts organisations to understand their rights and meet their obligations in relation to Australian workplace laws by providing information, resources, and support on issues of pay, workplace safety, and well-being. Today's webinar focuses on new laws which have been introduced to provide better protection for workers from sexual harassment and other forms of sex discrimination, harassment, and unfair treatment in the workplace. These laws were introduced in response to the Australian Human Rights Commission's 2020 Respect at Work report that I led while I was the Sex Discrimination Commissioner. One of the most significant changes is the introduction of a new Respect at Work positive duty, requiring businesses and organisations to take proactive measures to eliminate sexual harassment and associated behaviours. So, the session today, the first 15 minutes, I'll give an overview of what this new positive duty is about, including the background to the Respect at Work laws and why this change was vitally needed. And then for the next 20 minutes, Rosie and I will talk about the implications of this positive duty for the arts, culture, screen, and digital games sector, including what we know about sexual harassment and other inappropriate behaviours in arts workplaces, and how the sector has responded to these challenges to date. And then for the remaining 15 minutes or so, we'll move on to questions. So we invite you to submit your questions through the chat function, and we'll try to address as many as we can in the time we have available. Before we begin, I want to let those joining us know that today's discussion deals with sexual harassment and sex discrimination, and this may be distressing for some people. Creative Workplaces is working with the Support Act to make wellbeing services available to the music and broader arts and culture sectors. Support Act have a wellbeing helpline available to anyone working in the arts and culture sector. And for anyone needing support, there are contact details for the helpline and a range of organisations that can provide advice and support on the Creative Workplaces site that we'd love you to go to. And we've also put some of that information in the chat. So if we go to the background of the Respect at Work National Inquiry, in 2017, media reporting on allegations of sexual harassment and assault by Hollywood movie producer Harvey Weinstein reignited the Me Too movement, I think it's the previous slide when it comes up, the Me Too movement, and sparked a global conversation around workplace sexual harassment. In 2018, in the context of this global momentum, as the Australian Sex Discrimination Commissioner, I led a world first national inquiry examining sexual harassment in Australian workplaces, which is now known as the Respect at Work inquiry. Our 18-month-long comprehensive inquiry examined the nature, prevalence, impact, and cost of sexual harassment in our workplaces. It also looked at the drivers of these behaviours and measures to address them. The Respect at Work inquiry report, which was delivered in March 2020, made 55 recommendations for change across government, workplaces, and supporting organisations. Our findings were shocking. We found that sexual harassment is a common experience. In 2018, 1 in 3 Australian workers had been sexually harassed at work in the last 5 years. And the Commission's subsequent 4-yearly national survey in 2022 found a similarly high prevalence rate at 33%. Women experience sexual harassment at greater rates than men, but it's important to note that men also experience harassment. And in 2022, this was 41% for women compared to 26% for men. In addition, some groups of workers disproportionately experience sexual harassment. So that included people with an intersex variation, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people with disability, younger people, and people who identified as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or other diverse sexual orientations. What we identified was that the onus has been on victims to make a complaint, yet alarmingly fewer than 1 in 5 people who'd experienced sexual harassment at work made a formal report or complaint. And Australians across the country are suffering the financial, social, emotional, physical, and psychological impacts of workplace sexual harassment. The annual cost to the Australian economy was conservatively estimated to be $3.8 billion. Overall, we heard that the system, which relied on complaints about individual incidents of sexual harassment as the primary mechanism for enforcing the law and driving behavioural change, was not working. Within workplaces, we found that existing approaches to preventing and responding to sexual harassment were inadequate. These approaches typically focused on policies that prohibited sexual harassment and complaint mechanisms for workers to report it. They were legalistic and reactive and often contributed to ongoing harm to workers and have failed to stop rising rates of workplace sexual harassment. The report also found that existing laws and regulatory systems dealing with workplace sexual harassments were complex and difficult to navigate. So, in response to the Respect at Work report, a series of laws have been passed to strengthen workplace protections against sexual harassment and shift the system to focus more on prevention efforts to eliminate these behaviours in the workplace. These included changes to the legal and regulatory framework recommended in the report aimed at improving coordination, consistency, and clarity between the 3 key systems which deal with workplace sexual harassment in Australia: the human rights and anti-discrimination laws, the Fair Work laws, and the work health and safety laws. The new approach to addressing workplace sexual harassment is a paradigm shift from previous reactive complaint-based model, which the Respect at Work report found was ineffective, to a model that is preventative and proactive. Central to this new approach has been the introduction of a new positive duty in the Federal Sex Discrimination Act. This was a key recommendation of our report. This Respect at Work positive duty, which commenced on December 2022, requires employers and persons conducting a business or undertaking, so a PCBU, which is the same concept that's used in safety legislation, to take reasonable and proportionate measures to eliminate, as far as possible, workplace sexual harassment, sex discrimination, sex-based harassment. subjecting to eliminate subjecting a person to a hostile working environment on the ground of sex, and preventing acts of victimisations in relation to these matters. The Australian Human Rights Commission also now has regulatory powers with respect to the positive duty. I'll talk more about what that means in a moment. This important change means that organisations and businesses must take steps to actively prevent workplace sexual harassment and sex discrimination from occurring in the workplace or in connection with work, rather than responding only after it occurs. And this is the key change. This brings employers legal obligations in relation to sexual harassment and sex discrimination, in line with the approach to other work health and safety obligations to take preventative measures to ensure that all workers have a psychologically as well as a physically safe workplace. The positive duty shifts the responsibility from individual employees or workers having to enforce their right to a safe workplace by making a complaint. Instead, the responsibility is on employers to take meaningful action to ensure their workplace is safe and inclusive for all their workers, and to continuously assess and evaluate whether they're meeting the requirements of the duty. So there are some other changes that have affected the range of regulatory schemes which support the human rights and discrimination jurisdiction. And together, these changes create a more cohesive and systemic set of protections against sex discrimination and harassment. The Fair Work Clause, so the Fair Work Commission can now deal with disputes about sexual harassment at work and issue stop sexual harassment orders. Changes to the Fair Work Act also clarify that sexual harassment in the course of employment is considered serious misconduct and can be a valid reason for dismissal. The work health and safety system, now there are new regulations and model codes of practice on the psychosocial hazards in the workplace, making clear that sexual harassment is a risk to health and safety of workers and is covered by work health and safety laws. Safety is now clearly understood to refer to both physical and psychological safety, and psychosocial risks, including sexual harassment and other harmful behaviours, such as workplace harassment and bullying, have become a core area of focus for work health and safety regulators across Australia, which means that PCBUs have a duty to eliminate or minimise risks of exposure to sexual harassment as part of managing workplace psychosocial risks. And that includes them identifying and managing this risk through implementing control measures and regularly reviewing their risks and mitigation. And finally, changes to the Workplace Gender Equality Act reporting scheme that include new reporting obligations. From this year, organisations with 100 and more employees must report to WGEA on their workplace sexual harassment prevention and response initiatives. Although we are very aware that in the creative sector, most businesses are not of that size and so don't have to meet those obligations. So I mentioned earlier that the Australian Human Rights Commission's been given new regulatory powers to investigate and enforce compliance with the Respect at Work positive duties. These powers commenced for the Human Rights Commission on December 2023 and include powers to conduct inquiries, issue compliance notices, and enter into enforceable undertakings. The Commission has published guidelines to help organisations comply with their positive duty. So this guidance includes 7 interrelated standards that organisations should have regard to in order to help build a safe, respectful and inclusive culture in their workplace. And this slide shows you what those 7 standards relate to: leadership, culture, knowledge, risk management, support, reporting and response, and monitoring, evaluation and transparency. So there is really good guidance on what each of those standards mean and also how they differ for small versus larger organisations. And these Respect at Work standards represent the key components of a holistic framework to eliminate harmful workplace behaviours, that organisations can tailor to their workforce. So, not just for sexual harassment, but actually to prevent other inappropriate behaviours. Using the standards as a guide for implementation of effective prevention and response measures can assist organisations in meeting their respective work obligations by helping build safe and respectful and inclusive cultures. And this will help organisations to meet their obligations, not only in relation to the positive duty, but also their obligations under work health and safety, fair work, and where relevant, the workplace gender equality laws. So that is your sort of in a nutshell capture of some of those key reforms that were undertaken. And so I'm really delighted now that Rosie and I will have the chance to have a bit of a conversation between ourselves. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for reappearing, Rosie. And so we'll move on to the discussion session and specifically focus on the implications of the positive duty for the creative sector, which we know is a unique and important and complex sector. So we know, Rosie, that because of the Harvey Weinstein story, which was a screen and film industry story in 2017, that there was a lot of focus across the globe, including in Australia, on the screen industry. And that's resulted in some screen specific action, screen industry specific action that I know even I was involved with in Australia, and that has been a really useful example of industry action. So, as an example, I know you're well across that full history. Can you take us through some of the changes that the screen industry has had over and led on, in fact, over that period of time and what you might have learnt?
Absolutely, Kate. And firstly, thanks for walking us through all of that context and all of the changes that are taking place at the moment. That's an epic masterclass you've just given all of us. So, to understand the changes in the screen industry that resulted from Me Too, we actually need to go back just a little bit. So, Screen Australia first created Gender Matters in 2016, so just before Me Too and Harvey Weinstein started being called out for his actions. And that was, as I mentioned earlier, to address the lack of opportunities for women and gender diverse practitioners, but also to address the gendered power imbalance across the screen industry. And these efforts were in part informed by significant research done by Monica Davidson back in 2015. So when people were speaking out about Harvey Weinstein in 2017 and survivors were joining in on Tarana Burke's hashtag Me Too, Screen Australia was already well positioned to take action quite quickly. At that time, I was actually co-vice president of Women in Film and TV New South Wales and working at Screen Oz. And together with my colleagues, we pulled together the Safer Workplaces Symposium that we wonderfully had Kate come and speak at, which was fantastic. And that was designed to create a place for people to connect, to unpack and understand what was happening in the global industry, but then also locally what had been taking place. Simultaneously, across the broader team at Screen Australia, they created and published in early 2018 a code of conduct to assist the prevention of sexual harassment. These were the first efforts, or some of the first efforts, in what we now know as positive duty across the arts sector. This code was mandatory for all agency-funded productions, requiring producers to report and address any harassment or abuse that took place on projects. But I'd just like to note here that while this was a significant step, there's a large proportion of the screen industry that doesn't rely on Screen Australia funding or support, including news and reality TV, sport and light entertainment. So the strength of the code was limited. In September 2018, Screen Producers Australia and MEAA released the Screen Industry Code of Practice. And since July 2019, Screen Australia has required all funded projects to comply with this industry code. In February 2019, Screen Australia and the Gender Matters Task Force contributed to a submission to the National Inquiry into Sexual Harassment in the Australian Workplace. And since then, in 2022, so recently, the Screen Producers Australia and MEAA released a comprehensive national guidelines for screen safety. And while these guidelines are not a legal document, they provide advice on how to manage safety in the screen industry workplaces and how to comply with state and federal workplace health and safety regulations as at March 2021. So as we know, a couple of changes have taken place since then. Some educational resources were also built by a variety of different organisations, including Screen Producers Association, Screen Careers, as well as Screen Safe Australia and Screen Well. But despite all of that, there was some key research that was done in 2022 by the Australian Cinematography Society called A Wider Lens, and that clearly showed that while these efforts have had some impact, they haven't been enough, and that sexual harassment, bullying, and harm is still prevalent within the screen industry. And so that's a bit of a nutshell of what's taken place since 2015 through to up to 2022.
That's amazing. And so one of the things that I, as someone doing this work more broadly, that I learnt from what happened with Screen, I'll just tell you in a bit of a chat that's off script, I know, Rosie, but is that at the time the Harvey Weinstein thing happened and the sector came together, they looked at doing that code. And at that point, I'd been an employment lawyer for a long time, and I did think, um, like, I don't think a policy has ever stopped harassment occurring. Like, that was my experience. But what I learnt through that experience, which I am, absolutely committed to now, is what was important given the nature of the sector and the mobile, like, people have short term, and this applies in lots of other parts of the creative industries, is people moved around. It was confusing that you worked on this set and you had one set of policies and then this and there was another. By producing one sector wide position, you reduced all of that complexity, confusion, you made it consistent and really quickly, and it really informed some of our recommendations that, including through your submission, that actually, if you stop thinking workplace by workplace and you think about the workforce and how the workforce does their work, and this creative workplaces is so mindful that people are engaged in so many different ways and get paid in different ways. They're sometimes employees, but usually they're not. Usually they're contractors, or they're the artists themselves. They're the employer. So the multiple hats that our the council just repeatedly tells me how many hats they're wearing at one time, and it's not just a screen thing; it's right across the sector. So it was a really great opportunity for us to learn and to understand. If you understand your sector, then you can start delivering actions that will help the whole sector. It's more cost effective, it's much simpler, and yes, it didn't solve everything straight away, but it really, it's something that I've taken to other sectors.
Absolutely, Kate. And just to add to that, I think the other thing that happened as a practitioner myself was that it really solidified the importance of the guilds and unions. Of course, they've got such a large remit as it is, and hopefully people already have relationships with their guilds and unions. But when they banded together to create these codes of practice to really help really make sure they were working in interconnected ways, it really magnified their presence within the industry in a way that was really fundamental and foundational for lots of people's safety.
Yeah, and which is important because it's very hard when you're an individual who is hoping for the next job based on word of mouth, that you don't have the power that, if you are, one of numerous workers in a large business.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
So, Kate, as we know, like the sector is made up, as you were just talking about, a large proportion of sole traders and micro and small businesses, and they don't usually have the HR or legal departments that lots of the larger organizations, particularly ones with employees over 100 people, have. So, as a small business owner, I would love to chat through an example of what might happen in a tangible, realistic situation so that people can get a real sense of how these policies, legislation, and practices can be put into practice. So, as an example, if someone is a small business owner and has maybe one or two casual employees, or if in screen someone's making a short film or maybe a
Mm.
student film, for example, what would I need to do to safely to implement the respect at work strategies? And how does positive duty actually apply to me? And does it apply equally across everyone within the sector, regardless of the scale of the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it was something that was a really strong message that came through the Respect at Work inquiry. Was that I think, and I'm not going to get the stats exactly right, although I knew them off the top of my head a few years ago, but I think more than half of Australian workers work in small business, and so these are those sort of less than 100, but even less than 20 workers. And so what we identified was big businesses, and to be quite honest, it hadn't worked, but big businesses had big HR functions and they had policies and training and they could put the money into all these things. They still hadn't worked, partly because the focus, not intentionally, but the law kind of drove you towards what do you do when someone complains, which we now fundamentally understand that means that you haven't stopped it happening if that's where your focus is. But what we found in small business was that they were like, we have got so much, it is so difficult working out. And in fact, a lot of what Creative Workplaces does is to just really help the creative sector understand, what are the contract arrangements and what do you have to do in terms of super and, kind of all the detailed laws that exist and how does that turn into real life. On the respect at work, while that duty does apply to everywhere where work is done, and the definition moves the person conducting a business or undertaking, to some people that'll be familiar language, to others you'll be like, that's a whole lot of words, you're such a lawyer. But that what that means in work health and safety is it doesn't matter whether you employ them or not. If you have a business that could affect someone's safety, then you have some responsibilities, and that is how these laws apply. So that's the first thing I would say is I think lots of people used to technically try and think about who's legally responsible. Now, if you are doing something that might affect others, then you have responsibilities. But
Mm.
the laws are quite specific, and what is reasonable and proportionate for a small business employer is vastly different to what you would expect from the large film companies or whatever those. And I expect we've got both ends of the spectrum listening to this
Yeah.
conversation. Um, so the law does set out certain matters that the Human Rights Commission will take into account. And actually, we spend a lot of time writing this, but everyone knows exactly. If you're a small business, you know you're a small business. You don't need to look at your size, nature, and circumstances, resources, and practicality. But we did because the law wants it to be explained. So it really it's really clear that organizations, larger organizations, which is generally 200 or more people, will be held to a higher standard. And what I guess what I would say is, you can definitely look at the resources that the Human Rights Commission has, and they had some specific resources for small business that give some examples of what you can do. But if you look at those various things, where a large company might have a really complex, kind of well developed training program, for a small business, it would be an expectation that you talk to your staff at least, at some point in time, that you make sure that they've got access to information that might be information you get from the Creative Workplaces website, that you would consider what the nature of your workers are, and then think, this as a small business, I mean, small business people know their businesses. You might think, oh, I've got staff that are moving around, that maybe they're having lots of interaction with people that I'm not sure. Maybe some of the risks exist in some of those ways. So you've got a whole lot of different small things that you can do. And in fact, I hope they're the kind of things that you would know you have to do anyway to make sure that your people are able to do their work in a productive way. But you might think people move between industries. And then I would also say, a bit like the screen resources, if you're a small business, you just creative workplaces will be a place you can go. You would look at your, the guilds, the unions, the screen matters kind of stuff, the gender matters. You would just look around the industry and just find some resources. And so that might be, the chat might be, okay, we're starting this project, just reminding, it's law in Australia that's safe and respectful, but more than that, we actually care that this is important for you. I've just read some stuff here. Here's some things to think about. And if you have any concerns, please come to me and I will make sure we will deal with them. Like that might be, I'm not saying, because I can't say legally that might, but that's sort of what we're talking about in a face to face way. And I would say, um, it's not one of the things that we found in the inquiry was when we did focus groups and we'd ask them, if you think of a time that you had a good workplace, that it was safe and respectful, that you felt confident you could do something if something went wrong, and they never said, I was never told that what was important was there was a great policy, notwithstanding the fabulous policies that exist. It was always about the leader or the manager being really vocal and supportive, and they role model appropriate behavior. They've told me, what I can expect, and that they have encouraged me that I don't have to put up with these things. They've told me what I can do. I feel like if something goes wrong, I could speak up, but actually, mostly stuff doesn't go wrong because my boss, is not having a bar of that. So it's really about that one up manager. And so, whether in a big company or a small company, what the one up manager does. So I hope we heard lots of really good examples in small businesses of safe workplaces. Having said that, we heard some really shocking examples, because in a small business, if your boss isn't uh, prioritizing your safety and well-being, then that's your entire, like, where you don't have places to go.
Absolutely. And I think that's I like to believe that everyone has best intentions, but what we see a fair amount within the creative sector is that the pressure mounts, time deadlines
Yeah.
come up, budgets get stretched, people's resources get stretched, and in those tricky circumstances, things can happen, and care and respect can get deprioritized, unfortunately. Um, but yeah.
Well, and I was going to bounce off that. So, that list, which, all sound, it's the same list, it feels like, for everything, leadership, culture, but the risk mitigation, there is no, whether it's a creative sector, and particularly films. So, Fiona Donovan's on the council, and she's a designer, and just really can paint the picture of how funding challenges, deadlines, how things happen. Um, my comment would be, in the risk assessment part of those 7 standards, you would, in the not under the pressure, sit down and say, okay, what are the risk moments? The risk moment is when we're working long hours, when we're underfunded, what can we do to uh, address or mitigate the potential risk in those moments. Because, I mean, I'm not some Pollyanna saying that those things don't exist. That is absolutely, it's the world we're in now, and it's the sector across the board. But to just pretend that's not having an impact, or it's not harming people, is really not realistic. So that's, in lots of ways, the risk assessment is the part, and people do it with physical safety. So one of the great things is that the industries that I've worked in that are quite good at physical safety have actually been able to like a light bulb's gone off. Mining is the best example where they were like, oh, we just think of where there might be an accident and then we put in place, equipment or things to reduce the chance that that will happen. We know we can't guarantee it will never happen. And so apply that same approach. So in mining, fly in, fly out, there's very few women. They're staying in residential places where there might be risks that they would face. And what can they do to, so they started thinking, well, you don't send one woman, make sure if there's, if you've got, send three or four so that there's different, just different contexts to reduce the risk.
Interesting. It's a really interesting thought exercise to sit down and think about where those risks will be coming up at different times in the
Yep.
life cycle of a project and organization. I'd
Yes.
like to switch the question just a little bit at the moment, from positive duty to what do we do if something actually happens? And particularly if, for example, someone is working in a hospitality venue and there's a live gig happening and one of the musicians behind stage acts inappropriately. What would someone do in that situation to look after themselves? What would their rights be?
Yep. Yeah. And it's a really good example because this is, you'll know, there was a review of the music industry, and so we know each parts of the creative sector looks a bit different, but the risks still are there, and some of the reasons for that is that same both lack of security, but also that intersection of a whole lot of players in a particular context. So not to get the answer perfectly, but supporting people. What we found in Respect at Work was that often the thing that people go to, no matter who, all well intentioned and because of how we're trained, I guess, is people go immediately to what can you do to complain? How do you hold people to account? And what do we need? What's the evidence? What we found in Respect at Work is that actually the first response should be supporting the person who's experienced the conduct. And that's why it's fantastic that we work with Support Act. And it's just, there's a bit of a sense of justice first in our Australian psyche, get the person. But what we found, and that's why in the positive duty standards, there's the first, as you go to sort of the response part of your actions, the first one is support. And so what we found was that even for big employers, they weren't starting with supporting the person, they were starting with gathering evidence to look at what you could do to discipline or take action. So the first thing that we found that should be prioritized is just thinking about the safety of the person. Do they need, so many large organisations have employee assistance programs. We know Support Act has a call line, and as I've mentioned, the details are in the chat for Support Act. There is also publicly funded services like 1800 Respect to provide support. So, and what we found was like people somehow have to be making decisions on whether they want to make a complaint when really the first thing should be, I'm really, I've had something really traumatic happen to me. It might be the first time, but it also might be the 58th time, to be quite honest. And how is that, how are you dealing with that? And if I jump to, employees, you want to make sure people are aware of those services. And even if you're a venue, like your ideal, you would have seen it on the back of toilet doors if you have like numbers for those services so people can call them. So that's, and we on the Creative Workplaces website have a spot specifically that include a whole range of services. You might go there to see how you can find them. But then, and then the reality is not every incident will turn into a formal complaint. You might want to take it further, you might not. There might be ways you can share that information so that even though you don't want to be involved in a formal complaint, you might want the venue to know situations have happened. So this is a middle ground that hasn't really been done that very well in Australian workplaces. Um, and because I'm sure you're going to be able to talk to this, but people don't want to raise complaints, particularly in a small industry. If you want to get ahead, the research is really clear in lots of industries. People are like, there may or may not be reasons that I would bring a complaint. However, if you do, and the conduct could be, or it could be bullying, it could be sexual harassment, it could be actual or attempted sexual assault, obviously you can go to the police, but also the human rights commissions, they have call lines. There is a federal commission and there are also state commissions. You can go to either of those. And even before you make a complaint, you can call just to find out your options. So this was one of the things that we really found, is that people weren't empowered to know what their options were. So in workplaces, employers would often say, you need to make a complaint.
Mm.
And actually, a lot of people in the Respect at Work inquiry said, I did make a complaint, but if I knew that it would take 6 months and at the end of it, that person would get a rap over the knuckles and I would have had to, go through all this situation, I wouldn't have done it. So actually, there are places, again, it'll be on the Creative Workplaces site that you can go to find out your options. And you've already mentioned, Rosie, there'll be the unions, guilds. So there are actually, and we're trying to make sure on the Creative Workplaces website, so you only have to go to one place, that all of those options are listed. And the website isn't launched yet, although all these, the full website isn't launched, but all those resources are there with short descriptions of what the different agencies do, so that you can look there. And, I would really say for people, even if you don't know specifically what you want to do, there are lots of places you can go to just find out more. And then it might take you might think about it for a while and you might come back and think, no, I really want to do something. So that's kind of the support first, and then learn about your options. And absolutely, there are options to take action. But the other good thing is we now have the positive duty. So also, for those unions, there can be some momentum to ask situations, workplaces, to be looked into, particularly if they're places where concerning things occur.
What I really love about that, Kate, is for many people, there's been a potential numbness that's been built up over time around some inappropriate behavior, and people
Yeah.
can find that they don't want to make a big fuss about something that other people are going to tell them they should just easily dismiss and move on with.
Yes.
But to be
Yeah.
able to have someone external to check in with, to discuss the circumstance, as well as then what those options are, to then be able to go away and think about whether they want to take the next steps,
Yep.
is such a valuable piece of the puzzle that has been missed in so many circumstances. So hopefully that's really useful to people now. I do have a follow-up question to that, though. Is it a similar situation if you're not an employee at the venue? Say you're a musician and you're attending a gig, but you're not actually playing, or you're at an art gallery exhibition or an opening, or you're at a film festival as a punter, but you work in those industries and something happens. Are they similar options for you?
So actually, they are. There's some technical legal stuff which I think doesn't really um, benefit anyone to think about. But when we did the Respect at Work inquiry, we just found that people don't, it's not all one boss, one worker kind of scenario anymore. The places where sexual harassment can occur, bullying can occur, can be broader. So there
Mm.
might be technical questions about who would be liable, but the reality is, if that language about person conducting a business or undertaking, what that language is about is saying they don't have to work for you if you have a premises or if you're conducting some sort of business that impacts others, then you have a responsibility. So I would say a similar, it might be legal consequences, and I'm a lawyer, but I don't believe it's always that helpful to get really technical early, but lots of those resources for support exist for you um, just as much, whether you're a worker or not. And then those places that you can go to find out your rights, they absolutely will help you figure out whether you've got additional rights.
Wonderful. Now, just being mindful of time, and we have a
Yes.
fair
Yeah.
few questions to
Yeah.
come.
Yeah.
So I do have one that I'd love to cover off before we get to questions from participants, but we've mentioned this number of times that people don't often report. Are you able to give some insights into this that might be really useful for the people listening now or on the recording later?
Yes, so one of the reasons why the positive duty was absolutely so important is because in Australia the reporting rates have always been consistently low. The independent review into the Australian contemporary music industry made similar findings. It said that 82% of participants in that industry did not report. What we know from our surveys is there's a number of reasons. It's not considered serious enough. It's easier to keep quiet. People might think you're overreacting. Distrust of the process, concerns for career and reputation, and sadly, that those concerns are validated. And so we live in a country, not just in the creative sector, where you're meant to take a joke, get along, and particularly women, you've got to tough it out. Like some of those women roadies in some of the music industry, like these are, really resilient and highly tolerant
Mm.
people in an industry that it's been kind of a mark of honor that you put up with a lot of rubbish. So what that means is the positive duty is super important. That waiting for people to complain where they're not just complaining, they're putting their career on the line is not a realistic way to solve the problem. So that fear for your career is real. It's a reason why I'm really clear on the positive duty. It's also a reason why I think Creative Workplaces is a great resource to give people some of those information so they can make well-informed decisions. It's why the collective movement that we're in now for change is having more impact because it's not putting individual careers on the line to get big change. And to be quite honest, it's why I wanted to chair Creative Workplaces. The idea that creative sectors should be fair, safe, and respectful is a no brainer, but it's really hard individually to do it one by one.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. That fear of victimization and fear of being labeled difficult, particularly in a freelance industry and sector, is so problematic for people. But so it's really important, this work that's being done. I do have a question that has come through in the event that you are actually employed in an organization and someone behaves inappropriately and that person happens to be your boss or the person you're supposed to report to. What do you do in that situation? I know that will possibly loop around in
Yep.
circles to answers you've already given,
Yeah, yes,
but
yes.
it's a particularly emotionally tricky situation that lots of people find themselves in.
Look, it's really like it's almost the most difficult. And I said I saw some great examples in small business, but this is the classic of the worst example in small business. So there are options, and this is a big function of the Creative Workplaces website, is to provide people with information about your rights, to give you supports that don't rely on your employer providing them. So big companies might have employee assistance programs, but there are those other support agencies. And to give you information about your rights, you will need to make that decision. Over time, it might be that those employers are looked into for their steps on positive duty. You can definitely bring a complaint against that employer, but I'm not going to pretend like that's a big step to take, and
Mm,
it's complicated. So that's why, like, lifting the whole sector up is important, and that's why creating more job opportunities so that there are options. But yeah, I haven't got the silver bullet on that, but that's why the whole sector been getting better. And actually in the sector, often those small businesses are being engaged by other people, and you need that sort of down the line to hold those people to account.
absolutely. There is a question that's come through that's tangential to this, that if someone has been engaged to work for a company, and as part of that role, they've been asked to do, let's say, more social networking events, potentially with donors or with organizations that have a significant amount of power, or they're a stakeholder in the
Yes.
company that someone's working in. If
Yes.
an uncomfortable, awkward, damaging, or scary
Yep.
situation happens at one of those events, the complicated nature of then needing to report to someone who's potentially reliant on that relationship becomes even more complex.
Yep.
What advice would you give to someone in a situation like that?
So I would start with creative workplaces is for artists and for arts workers and employers. So I would start with saying that the arts sector does require a lot of, and actually quite often, free networking,
Mm,
free work, which actually does exist in other industries as well. So you go into different networking events, you've got an art exhibition on, and you need to attend and speak about your work at at a launch, and then you need
mhm,
to go to people's homes as donors and those kind of things. The first thing I would say is we now know that it's not the only risk factor. Actually, Respect at Work told us that a lot of the sexual harassment happens at your workspace, and so it's not all at drinks functions after hours. But I would say if you are employed, your employer needs to just be thinking about, well, this will be a risk scenario, and
mm,
needs to two things. One is just be really loud and clear for those other, to the extent that you can, that you expect people will be respectful. It's a completely different scenario, but if anyone travels on the plane at all, whichever airline that you get on and they say you should treat each other and our staff with respect,
mm,
and then they absolutely take action, and they will boot you off as the customer. And in the old days when I was a lawyer, the client was always right.
mm,
Now, yes, while it's nuanced for donors, I think that you need to identify that as a risk. For the people who are in that scenario, you still need to, if you've got an employer, you would need to talk to them. It might be there's a nuanced approach. It might be um, that someone is spoken to, but we are now in a world where, fortunately, that is not just accepted as a normal part of doing business. But you're right, that this is one of those power dynamics in the
mm.
creative industry that is more challenging than other industries. But it was
Absolutely.
a great question.
Really great question. Thank you for submitting that, whoever did. Um, and I guess with the last 5 minutes that we have, I would love to know if you've got any examples of organizations in the arts sector that are doing a really great job of positive duty.
I would say at the moment, everyone is really just getting up and running. So the enforcement started as at December of last year. I've been involved with a number of organisations that are doing this thinking that the best thing, I'm not, there will be really good examples. And on the website, when we launch early next year, we will have case studies that will show you some examples of things that you can do. But as of this minute, I'm not going to just pull out one, partly because the minute you're given as a good example, then, Tall Poppy Australia will say, yeah, but someone didn't have a good time at some point. But I think I think the most exciting, I mean, I really have been pleased by the collective work in the screen industry and
Mm,
particularly some of the education work that's been really encouraging for me. And so I think in lots of ways, I would say there's bits, and I think that's what our case studies will show. We will start bringing creative industries and we will showcase a particular industry situation or workplace for a particular aspect of what they're doing. Because I don't think anyone is perfect, me included, in this. We're all learning, but we're learning supported in a world where the sort of the expectation that we should tolerate poor behavior that actually is lessening, and and we still need more diversity in our leadership. I think that, I mean, certainly as a driver, that's one of the key factors that creates additional risk if you
mm,
know that it's a very it's been a very one-dimensional
yeah,
industry. The Weinstein example in the US is, you know, particular white men in uh, power have been running the show, but that is changing too. So yeah, so
absolutely.
I think we thank you, Rosie. I am going to, just looking at the time as well, use this as an opportunity to thank you. I was so delighted that you could join me for this chat, and I know your real life experience always reminds me of how we turn what kind of a laws into real lived experience. So it's been great.
Well, thank you for
Um,
having me, Kate. It was been a real honor to share the screen with you and to unpack all of this for everybody together.
Fantastic. And for anyone who would like more information on respect at work or the positive duty, you can go to the Australian Human Rights Commission. They've published a range of resources and guidance, including guidance for small businesses, and so that might be useful. A consistent theme that our Creative Workplace Council have heard in our consultations to date is that the arts, culture, screen, and digital games workplace lack the infrastructure, systems, knowledge, and capacity to ensure fair, safe, and respectful working environments. And so, our role at Creative Workplaces is to support the sector on this through sessions such as today's session. And so, on that note, our next webinar will be on Monday, the 28th of October, on the topic of psychosocial safety in the arts, culture, screen, and digital game sector. And registrations for that will open soon. So, please keep an eye on our e newsletters, our website, and also the LinkedIn page for creative workplaces. So, thank you so much for your time and participation today, and I wish you a good day.
Thank you, everybody.